Welcome to part 2 of Money Part 3, Tithing, and this is episode 27. So we just mentioned 2 Corinthians 9, 6, and 7. Give cheerfully, right? What can we learn from that? Well, this teaches us the principle of sowing and reaping, purpose in your heart to do something and then follow through with it, not begrudgingly. That would be giving too much to where, it hurts you and you don't want to do it. And I don't mean sacrificial giving. I mean the attitude. So you give what you can as much as you can without having a bad attitude about it. And that's an offering. Do not give because you're required to, or because it's a set amount that someone else told you to give. Remember Jesus' parable of the widow's mites. She gave 2 mites, all that she had, 100% of what she had, but it wasn't a set dollar amount. It was like 2 pennies. It was worthless in the eyes of most people. And God's like, no, she gave more than everybody. Why? Because she gave cheerfully. She wanted to. So God only wants cheerful giving. Now, back to tithing. We need to understand that while tithing is not a requirement in the New Testament, we are still required to support those who hold the office of pastor, or sometimes in your version of the Bible, it might say bishop. It's similar to the office of priest in the Old Testament, yet it's vastly different. These people who are your preachers, who that's their sole job, if they have committed themselves, their time, their family, their life to God, just like the priests, then how do they support themselves financially? Where do they live? How do they send their kids to school? How do they prepare for the future, for retirement? How do they save? You got to understand, the priests of the Old Testament were not allowed to have an inheritance because they and their children and their grandchildren were promised to be taken care of by the other 11 tribes when they gave their tithes. So what are we doing to take care of our pastors and their children? Maybe you ought to give a class to your pastor about investing for the future and retirement and setting up different accounts. Each state has a separate type of account for your kids' schooling. I forgot what that's called, but you got to know the tax code. Maybe you should have a class for your pastors when you give your tithes and offerings, whatever it is that you choose to give, that he knows how to use it wisely to prepare for his children. Just something to think about. Now let's look at some Bible verses, though. There's 2 I want to bring up. 1 Corinthians 16:1 says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." So that's just a very simple principle of saving money every week to give to the church. As God has prospered you, it is not a command to tithe 10% of what you have. It is a command to give based on how much you have. So that there's no need to call up an offering because there's something happened in the pastor's life or a missionary's life where they need stuff. We're already gathering things and storing it up for God's use. And then 1 Corinthians 9:13, "Do you know that they which minister about holy things live of the things of the temple?" They live off of what is in God's house, the people who minister. "And they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar." So we're talking about Leviticus again, how when they were given a cow to sacrifice to God, they were allowed to keep the shoulder and certain parts of it to eat for dinner. So literally at the altar, the priests are reaching into the offering plate and taking money out to use for themselves, to buy groceries. Okay? So that principle is there. And then verse 14, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." The people that they preach to should be taking care of them. All right, so here's my view, guys. Proverbs 3, 9, and 10. "Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine." 3 quick points here. All that we have is God's. We're just stewards of it. 1 Corinthians 10:26, "For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." Number 2, tithing is not commanded, but Supporting those who spread the gospel is commanded all through the New Testament. How do you help support your pastor? How do you help support missionaries? Are you actually helping? Number 3, we should give cheerfully to the Lord's work, but it's called offerings. So that means offer your time, offer your skills. If you're a roofer, if you're a landscaper, mow the lawn in front of the church. Help the old ladies of the church who are widows who can't afford to have their lawn mowed. Go mow their lawn. Whatever your skill is, use that for God's people, and then your treasure as well. I'm not saying it should be first or last, but when you give to the Lord, you should give an offering of everything. So I'm not just talking out of the side of my mouth here. I do that, my time. Okay. I study for this podcast. I put in about 8 to 12 hours a week. I go to church early sometimes to hold the door and greet people and drive through the parking lot and pick people up. I give of my talent with teaching, etc. I go to Bible studies. I do what I can. Okay. And my treasure, every pay period, I have a set amount that I give to the church to help support the ministry. And I also have an envelope at home that I put a little bit of cash in, like $20 a month sometimes less. But I use that for charity. Giving to the Lord when I see a need. I plan for it. So when we talk about money and we talk about tithing, it's not necessarily tithing. It's a matter of your heart and reaping what you sow. Are you even sowing into the Lord's ministry with your time, your talent, or your treasure? So here's the conclusion, guys. A tithe is just 10%. It just means 10%. So if you want to talk holy and say, oh, I give a tithe to the Lord, that's fine. But it's just 10%. It's just a number, okay? Tithing in the New Testament is not commanded because we are not under the civil and ceremonial law of the Old Testament. But we are commanded to give cheerfully, and the amount is between you and God. So just remember, you reap what you sow. Are you going to be stingy or are you going to be generous? 10% is a good goal, and there's lots of verses in the Bible about giving to God and then your wine presses and your barns bursting forth because you have so much excess because God's blessed you for what you've given. All right? So I hope that helps you a little bit on the principle of tithing in the Old Testament versus the principle of giving offerings to the Lord and being thankful and being happy about it without a set dollar amount in the New Testament. Now, next time we're going to be doing Money Part 4. We'll be talking about debt and whether or not there's good versus bad debt, etc. And until then, may God bless you all.